Welcome to the Behavioral View. Hey everyone, would you like to get a CEU for this episode? Listen closely for the announcement of 3 secret words delivered throughout the episode. Take note of those words, and we'll tell you where to go to get your CEU when the show is over. Hi everybody, and welcome back to the Behavioral View. My name is Shannon Hill. I am Editor-in-Chief at the CentralReach Institute.
Oh, and I'm Carrie Millick. We're going right to the introduction. Sorry, we pre-planned this, and I missed my cue. I'm Carrie Millico. I'm the Director of Clinical Programming at CentralReach.
And I'm Nissa Bennett, and I'm the Director of Assessment and Clinical Training here at CentralReach.
Nissa may be called out of the meeting, so if she just disappears and comes back or just disappears, it's okay. Nothing has happened to her. But we also have guests today. Who are you, guests?
I'm Rob El Fatal. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Maraca Learning.
And I'm Nicole McMillan. I'm the Chief Clinical Officer at Maraca Learning.
We are so excited to have you guys here. Thank you for joining us.
We're super excited to hang out with y'all.
We're going to talk about quality services and organizational culture, which is really fun and exciting. But before we do, we got to do our question of the day. Got to start small. And today, the question, let me read it exactly, is what do you do when you're not sure what to do next? Who wants that one first?
I know that I always phone a friend every time. I feel like when I don't know what to do, I've been, I think, just so lucky throughout time, whether it's personal or professional, to just be able to surround myself with a lot of people that are way smarter than me on a lot of different things. And like even the other day, I was like, what's the best walkie-talkie system for a clinic to have? And I was like, I knew exactly who to go to. And she sent me the Amazon link and then check it off the list. So yeah, I feel like I usually try to lean in on my support system as much as possible.
I love it. Love the example too.
Yeah.
Walkie-talkie systems are hard to find. Really good ones for clinics. We've been through it. So yeah, it's good to have those resources.
Yeah.
I love that answer, Nicole, because it just highlights the importance of surrounding yourself with great people who keep pushing you to do better and to be better. Yeah, that's a great answer.
What's your answer then, Rob?
Yeah, so when I saw this question, I immediately thought of one practice, which is just putting myself in a position where I can have some degree of silence and solitude, whether it's like going outside, going for a walk. I find just at times like things just unlock for me when I'm like on a walk outside in nature, or even just being outside, having just a little bit of silence and solitude. Oftentimes when I'm just not sure what to do, that gives me like at least some degree of next steps. And oftentimes it does result in a similar response as what Nicole mentioned, just leaning into your team. We all have great colleagues, and that's beautiful when you can work together with great people who are like-minded. So yeah, just retreating. I live in Boise, so I've got like foothills all over, like surrounding. I've got beautiful mountains everywhere. Half a mile any direction, and I'm by myself, which is delightful.
Sounds delightful. I'm similar in that my first reaction to that is just slow down the action. And a lot of the times that does mean, it sounds stereotypical, but just take the deep breath, because my mind will be going so fast. I'm processing through and all I'm doing is panicking, really. So if it's something where I can go do something outside, where I can break the action and go, I don't know, chop vegetables, whatever, that's always very helpful. But if I'm in a situation where maybe I'm at work and I can't walk away right then and there, just try to focus on the smallest component of what this is. basically just take myself all the way back to the introductory of whatever, if this is observing, doing an observation, if this is trying to create a spreadsheet, whatever it is, what is the smallest thing that I actually know how to do with this? Do that thing, get that momentum going of, hey, I solved a little part of it. And it's not quite as momentous after that.
Yeah.
What about you two?
I can jump in. I think I do a combination of both. Nicole and Rob's, my first reaction is to always take a step back and go work out. If I'm stressed, if something that is in front of me that I don't think I can handle, I don't know what to do, I will go lift a barbell, go for a run, just get my head outside of whatever it is that's causing that stress. But then my second is to go to my group texts. I have a couple of different group texts where it's just, I'm putting this out there. You don't have to solve it. I just need it out of my own head somewhere. And some group texts, if it's my colleagues, will come back with some solutions and support. And then if it's my girlfriends, it's, all right, let's meet, let's go for a run, let's do something to get you out of this moment.
Nissa,
And then I come back.
can I just say that I'm a little bit upset that I'm not on any of your group texts? Like, where's the group text with Rob? We go way back.
We do. There are some group texts with you on there, Rob.
Maybe. I wish that I saw more text messages from you, Nissa.
My group texts with Nissa are just pictures of wine. It's Friday after work, and I'm like, "What you doing?" Yeah, when this question first came down the pike, I was like, I feel like I'm just really decisive, and there's little opportunity where I'm like, I don't know what to do, because I get this. I'm one who's, I need to make a decision. But then I was like, oh, Nicole, like what you were saying, I view that as knowing what to do. I view like calling my friend as something I know what to do, right? Oh no, I have this resource, or I have like my board of directors for my life or for my career, those advisors that we all have. And it's not so much of it comes from me, but it's I view that as, oh no, I have my system. And I don't know, I view that not so much as me not knowing what to do, but as, oh no, that's a decision that I make to be like, yeah, tap into your resources. I agree. And I also think that when that doesn't produce fruitful outcomes, which is very minimal occurrences, then I think I do a bit of Rob, although I'm not so much of an outdoorsy gal. But mine is, I think I need to like sleep on it, because I am so much in my head. I sent Nissa and Shannon like a little meme last night when this came through, and it was like a picture of this woman with flames as like a thought bubble, because it does like my thought, so I can't turn it off, right? I have to, if there's something that is unfulfilled or undecided, I have to keep on thinking about what is that resolution until I actually think of one. I think for me is that then I have to go to sleep. And when I wake up the next morning, it doesn't feel as ominous, right? It doesn't feel as suffocating or as like immediate and as important. I'm still important, but it's not like it has to happen now. And I feel like you're right, Rob, when you said the word unlock. My father-in-law and I were talking about even like video games. Oh, I can't pass this level. And then the next morning, your first try, oh, I passed that level. I don't know if it's like breaking a chain of like thought patterns that like somehow you can just see a new path forward. But yeah, I think it's a little bit of combo of what you all do as well. But I'm very much like making a decision is highly reinforcing in my world.
Have any of y'all read The Extended Mind, or have heard of this book?
No.
Okay,
No.
so I read this book probably 3 months ago, and it explained a lot of what I know of myself. It's just the author highlights the importance of our bodies as an extension of our minds, and how important it is to exercise and work our body and sleep. Every single one of us had some degree of response related to like our bodies and how our bodies interact with the world around us. And sleep is a miracle cure, apparently. That's one of the most important things you can do in no matter what you're trying to accomplish. It's like you want to perform better athletically, sleep more. You want to perform better academically, get more rest. Like just no matter what, it's like sleep is so important. So that's a great read if y'all haven't read it yet.
Yeah. Ever since I had my babies, I was like, this woman will no longer have her sleep interrupted. I will do anything to make sure I get no less than 8 hours.
Agreed.
Unless I'm at a conference, then it's like game on. But you know,
Hours will suffice. Is that right, Carrie?
I can rally, but then I crash the week after I come home.
Okay, we started a little late, and so it's already time for a secret word, even though we haven't launched in yet. But we all know I have to follow these prompts from my phone or I'll forget them. And the first secret word is 3, THRE, the number 3. But let's just see if I can do a segue. Let's see how good I am. I slept really well. I'm having a really high quality of life. My brain is working as well as it possibly can today. So I'd really love to talk about quality within our organizations. How's that? Did I do a good job there?
You did great.
Yeah.
Right.
Really smooth segue there, Shannon.
So I think we agreed to start out with just thinking about how do we define organizational culture and how do we define quality services. So it's a very tiny little thing that I'm sure you guys can sum up in a minute and a half. What is quality? How do you know you have it? Rob, you wrote a whole article on this. I think you can lead us off, surely, right?
Maybe, but you know what? You said one of your comments that you made was, oh, Rob, this is such a small issue. You could probably answer this question in a minute and a half. The reality is that's not true. It's just, this is such a rich subject that like from thinking about organizational culture, like there's so many different ways to approach the subject. There's so many different definitions. Like this is one of those areas where you talk to a behavior analyst and they'll give you a definition of organizational culture. And then you talk to an IO psychologist and they'll give you a definition of organizational culture. And then you read a business book and then you're reading another definition of culture. And so there are so many different definitions or ways to think about culture. But I think that in relation to quality, where those two come together, I think the most helpful place to start is really in thinking of the designing of cultural practices that promote high quality outcomes. So the way that we think about it, and I think that this is hopefully the way that many think of this issue, at least in relation to what we all do as behavior analysts working in the settings that we do, but it's really designing cultural practices that promote high quality outcomes. And that does not happen just by accident. Like it really does require intelligent management at all levels of the organization to design practices that help learners make progress and that are addressing issues of social significance and importance for our learners. So that's really like where I think quality and culture intersect. And in the literature, you read things like when you have a dissatisfaction with the products or services produced by a culture, then that really highlights a cultural issue. So when you're dissatisfied with the services that your organization is producing, then that really speaks to something that's happening within that organizational culture that needs to change or that needs to improve. And so there's just so much to this. This could be something like, this is an area that I love because I feel like I can study this the rest of my life and never ever be like, oh, I've solved it. Or, yeah, I got it. It's just not that, Shannon. It's so extensive and it's so rich. And it's beautiful, honestly. Like a well-designed culture is a beautiful thing and it's a good thing because of what it produces.
Yeah, no, I was totally being sarcastic, but it reminded me of, gosh, when I was an intern, like finishing my PhD, and I was at the University of Minnesota and had the most magnificent mentor there, Charlie Lakin. And I went to sit down. He called me in his office, and this guy was the head of everything, and he's taking time with me. And he said, what do you want to do while you're here? Because it was that kind of place. You can just tell us what your research line wants to be. We'll help you. They had data growing on the walls. So I really want to work on quality of life. And he said, there's no such thing. You can't do that. because we've put a lot of energy into trying to define quality of life. And yeah, there are checklists and that sort of thing, but in the end, it's all about this person and how their life is aligning with what they want that to be. And I'm wondering, are there parallels for that within an organization? I know we have checklists. I know we have a lot of things that we can check and the goals that we are setting. But do you think that you can ever be there in terms of saying, I have a high quality organization? Or is it all a spectrum?
I think there are so many variables that you're looking to track when you're thinking about quality. And we're seeing this a lot in the field with burnout and turnover and individuals who are leaving the field even. And I think when you think about a high quality organization and then the culture that supports it, it's the level of support and training, the level of the team and the clinicians at every level that come into touch with those individuals that are receiving services. But in addition to that, the processes, right? If you're going in and you have no idea what your role is, what the process looks like, what your expectations are to serve a client and produce these outcomes, you're going to be in a system where you don't feel supported. You don't feel like the culture is one that you can grow in. And if we're thinking about quality of life, not only for our learners, we're thinking about it for our staff. It's their quality of life, their quality of their career, whether that be the first place they start their career or somewhere that they've been a tenured, experienced professional that they're spending their time. We want to evaluate the quality on both ends.
Happy staff, happy learners. And I feel like a lot of this stuff really stems from like the mission of the organization, right? Like it's really hard to create a culture if you, like so many, I think clinicians get into the field or find themselves, and I know I did when I first started my business too, is like, I am reacting to some sort of event where I am quickly starting an organization. Like it was, and then you pop up, you started, and then it was like, oh, mission, vision, value statement. Okay. And because at first you're more like responding to the urgent, necessary things to make sure that people are getting paid and things like that. But without these things that at a surface level seem superfluous, they actually aren't. They are the creed of the organization. They are the lighthouse that guides you. And without any of that, you are lost. And without that, you actually can't create the culture for which your organization that culture is defined by.
I want to get you guys to be specific, but first, secret word number 2 is jingle. Jingle. Yeah, jingle. It's a happy little word, right? So, specifically, what are we looking at? What are we measuring? How are we tracking this?
Yeah, I think one variable that I would love to see come into the conversation more is, and I think a couple of you already mentioned it, is really retention of your employees. Because I think, that care team that's serving that learner, if they're turning over every month or so, you're not going to get the patient outcomes that you're going to want to see. And so I think, yeah, I've started to see more conversation about employee retention, but not directly how it impacts patient outcomes. And so I would love to see some more data that kind of speaks to that conversation, because I think that's really going to be, I would say, a big kind of defining variable for some organizations and how they define quality. And I think that data is also going to help continue to drive more conversations about healthy practices within a culture of an organization to support their employees and want them to be able to really give their all to their learners. And that's where we're going to see those patient outcomes.
Have you all found a good retention measure? Because the RBT is our most transient credential, and the organization that I'm a co-owner at, there's people who leave because they've graduated and they're moving because they're now going to grad school, or they're a poli-sci major and it's not in their wheelhouse to move up to a BCBA or something like that. So there's turnover that is good and healthy because yes, you shouldn't be in this role anymore. You need to go live your life, and this is not in your career path. But and then there's the turnover that obviously you don't want. So you're not going to look at 90, 100% for those direct care staff, RBT,
Staying for a period of time.
Yeah, what is a good sweet spot?
Yeah, I
I
think
think
how we started to look at it was preventable versus non-preventable. So non-preventable was that natural attrition, like you were talking about, Karen, of really, we're happy for you. Like you graduate, go on to your next journey. Hopefully we have instilled with you. I know at Maraca, we talk about it, like once you're a Moroccan, you're always a Moroccan. So hopefully that we've really instilled that within you to take it on to your next journey in your career. But really, I think it's that preventable that then should lead you to have more organizational discussions around what that leads to. Now, Carrie, to your question about what is that sweet spot, that's where I would love to know more in terms of what we should be looking at organizations regarding preventable turnover.
Man, I love the preventable versus non-preventable, because I think you can really drill that down to the things that are preventable are the things that are within your scope as a behavior analyst. Supervision, writing a really well-designed treatment plan with really clear procedural fidelity check-ins, and being consistent and following through with all of the different CPT codes that were provided. I think the non-preventable ones are the ones that Carrie's speaking to, where there are some organizations that then offer career paths. You know what? You do have an opportunity to go to another organization, to move across country. However, we would like to keep you here. Here's an option for you. Can you live in a different state, but do our intake because you understand our culture? There are ways that you can keep those non-preventable individuals, especially if your culture is so good. I've worked in my previous life in places where you would do whatever it took to stay because it was such a wonderful culture fit for your values and your alignment. But I think in the same topic, and I want to give everyone else a chance to answer, I was on the Maraca website and I saw CLIMB, or the CLIMB program. And I looked at that and it looks really interesting in terms of kind of support and core sequences for your staff.
Yeah.
Is that kind of a component of what's supportive in the preventable phase?
Yeah, all of you have identified a couple different cultural phenomena from my perspective. One, culture is very it's amorphous, right? So what is it and how do we improve it? And you can't improve something that you aren't able to measure. And what should you measure? So we talked about retention and all of these things, but all of y'all have mentioned cultural practices. Really, these are all cultural practices, right? We talk about culture is the sum of its cultural practices that produce the right products and services that are going to get selected by the people that are to use your products or services. But NISA CLIMB is it's going to kick off this semester. So we're really excited for it. And it's for our BCBAs or our BCBAs in training. I think we're opening it up to that group. We've got one or two individuals who are pursuing BCBA certification. And it's really it's professional development for BCBAs. And we've got at least for the next term, we've got a set of things that we want to cover in terms of really helping to elevate their practice. And we use a lot of mountain analogies, maybe because we're in Boise, I'm not sure, but we came up with CLIMB because it just seemed fitting and appropriate. We say on the website that nobody climbs a mountain to get to the middle. And we feel like that's very true. We're excited to keep scaling that mountain of quality. And it's a lot of work. This organizational culture is not something that you make a couple quick changes and all of a sudden you've got this baller culture that everyone wants to be a part of. It's like planting a tree. It takes decades for that thing to look beautiful. Now, culture is not exactly, you can improve culture, but it takes time. It's hard work.
When you guys were talking about that, I was trying to remember the name of an article, and so I looked it up and I didn't find it, but I found another one on predictors of burnout in behavior technicians, the Novak and Dixon article. And one of there are groups of predictors, but one of them is personality characteristics of the technician. So I'm curious about how you incorporate this into selection of employees. Because a lot of those are, I have weird feelings about personality being grouped together as a precondition for employment.
Have y'all read that? I think it was Callahan in 2019.
2019,
behavioral artistry.
There's 7 characteristics. Yes.
Yeah. It is my previous team would probably make fun of me because once I found it, I was like, oh, I've been looking for this for, I feel like, years. But we really tried to start to focus on it and have a conversation about it, because I think to your point, Shannon, I'm like, how do you operationalize personality? It's so hard, particularly when you're looking to, select those new team members from a new hire standpoint. And so I just love the way they took this concept. I think it was Fox back in the late 90s that talked about this concept of the behavior technician being a behavior artist, and what did that kind of incorporate in the characteristics, and being able to operationally define that a little bit better, and then to help to onboard new hires to your team, but also to just support them and try to shape up that repertoire. So then when everyone leaves Maraca for whatever reason or whatever other ABA agency, we've created these behavior technicians that are behavioral artists, and they can go and contribute to the field at large, which I think would be my goal, as well as everybody else on this call, to make sure that we're contributing to just the field in general. So yeah, I think that article for me really did a nice job of kind of defining what would be some of those characteristics that we would want to see in a really effective technician.
And how do you see that in the interview, though? Have you guys gotten very good at that yet?
So I think I've been a part of organizations that have done various practices. I really think, I know Maraca had started to do this recently, of bringing that technician into the clinic, or potential technician into the clinic, if you have one in their region, seeing how their first response to learners, seeing their response to other employees, and trying to get as much objective information as possible during those initial interactions, I think is really helpful. I've seen some role play type interviews done pretty nicely to try to get at that as well. I think trying to use as much behavior analysis in that interview process as possible, as opposed to just a set of interview questions.
I love that. Great tip.
We had a candidate that we ended up hiring, and he was one of the individuals that came from a batch of BTs that we hired that were, one second. He was in a batch of BTs that we hired that didn't come into the clinic. So when we first opened, all of the BTs were interviewed in the clinic. And then we shifted our practice just a little bit. And then all of our interviews were being done remotely. And it was during that time where those BT candidates weren't seeing the clinic, and we hired one of them. And he did his training, he started, and then right before we kind of put him out into the field, he just mentioned to us that he didn't think the job was for him. And he said, Rob, I look around at the aptitude of these people, and then I just realized that I do not have what they have. Like, I just do not have it in me to do this job. And that speaks to the importance of really putting people in a position where they're coming into close contact with the work that they're actually going to be doing. I think had he seen it before he decided to take the job, he probably would have realized, oh, this isn't for me. I want to do something entirely different. But it's really hard to understand what ABA looks like until you're actually in the center or in the home providing treatment.
I do want to go back to the question to Nicole on what are the measures, or how does that look like in the interview process with the behavioral artists. I think I would love to see in organizations, and I know it's such a touchy subject to think about personality traits as individuals that would succeed in this field. But I think some of the literature, like Callahan in 2019 and Fox in the 90s, and other service providing helping professions have indicated that those types of behavioral characteristics do support optimal outcomes for learners. So I think there are different measures, taking the behavioral artist kind of checklist and just checking it and making it as least subjective as possible. But there are empathy scales. I know there's the Jefferson scale of empathy. That is a nice 20 questionnaire assessment that you administer directly to the staff. They self-administer it. You score it and you give them the feedback. It's out of 100. You scored an 80. The range for individuals who are empathetic, working in the helping industry, like nurses and oncologists, they range 100 to 105, which is over the scale. We would love to support you in increasing that. So there is a nice measure that we can help if we can identify what are those behaviors that we're looking for to increase empathy, to make sure you're successful with the learners that you are working with and those families that you're working with. I think that's I don't know if that's a direction our field is going. It would be a great study, I think, to understand how that impacts outcomes for learners.
Yeah, I think part of retention is just hiring. How do you retain great people? Well, you make the right hires to begin with. So I do think it's important that your hiring practices are promoting high quality by ensuring you're putting people in positions where they can stay as long as, as they can, knowing that it is a position where people do come and go, but there's a lot of turnover that I think can be prevented by just making the right hiring decisions at the onset.
Hire slow, fire fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you guys find that most of the people that you're hiring at the technician level do want to continue on in behavior analysis? Do they want to become behavior analysts, or do they want to stay at that technician level? Is this a college job? What do you see overall?
I think most often what I see is individuals who are interested in working with kids, but who maybe this is like their first exposure to behavior analysis. And then they get so excited and they love the work that they do decide to pursue a career in behavior analysis, which is always a really beautiful thing to see. But on occasion we get maybe 10%. It'd be hard to put a number on it or quantify it, but there's a degree of individuals that we hire that are certainly like committed to behavior analysis as they're coming into that BT role. But then there's a number who do the work and realize how incredible it is. It changes people's lives. And, they decide that they want to make a career out of it, which is, again, it's always a beautiful thing to witness.
So in terms of a career ladder, what are some best practices for supporting people through that process?
At Maraca, we've conceptualized a system to put in place for that. We haven't quite rolled it out, but I think have done a really nice job of kind of defining what those different tracks look like. So if I'm going to really want to pursue my BCBA, I might be exposed to a variety of different experiences leading up to that BCBA versus I want to be an RBT. I want to be a behavior technician for the foreseeable future. And so then again, putting the contingencies in place to support that individual through their professional development journey as well. I think I've seen a lot of organizations put things in place to support future BCBAs. And I think that's fantastic because we need to be doing that and we need to be doing it in a quality way. But what about our technicians that are like, hey, I'm probably going to do this for 2 to 3 years while I'm pursuing a degree in speech language pathology, and that's great. And so we want to support those individuals too and making sure that they're getting the right type of professional development experiences. And so I think at Maraca in particular, we've conceptualized it in 2 different tracks, but I think overall, like for an organizational framework to be able to see it in that dichotomy in terms of buckets of opportunities for those types of individuals.
And by the way, all of this is presented in a mountain. It's like a mountain that the BTs are climbing. Just so you know, in case you were wondering what it looked like, Shannon, it's a mountain and they're climbing it.
Do they get climbing shoes?
We'll have to see. Okay?
What accessories?
We'll have to see what they get when they're climbing.
And Robbie, I am really bad about climbing halfway up a mountain and getting tired. Is that okay?
6 boxes. You need tools and resources. Climbing shoes are tools and resources.
That's very cool.
Can we pivot back to culture? Because I would love to see. Do you guys have some organizational wide cultural assessments that you use within your organization to do a temperature check on where the culture is at within your organization? Any that you recommend?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think the way that you do this, Carrie, is you find one area of culture that you want to measure. Because again, culture it's the sum of everything. Like your culture really is, I think Aubrey Daniels, the way that he defines culture, it's like how things are done around here, right? So it's everything. But I do think that you can identify and measure aspects of your culture. And I think that's where you win. So the way I read a handful of articles that were sent to me by a professor at Texas A&M. And I asked her the question because we are collaborating on this particular thing. And I said, so I have a question for you. Does culture, like to what degree does culture change? She said, Rob, I'm not sure that like culture changes day in and day out because I think culture is relatively fixed, but you see a degree of like sentiment, right? Like the way that people think and feel about culture does change day to day. And we actually have a presentation on sentiment and organizational culture and how sentiment can change, but Most often culture is relatively fixed, but that's not to say it's not changeable. Like you cannot change it. You can, but it takes time. So I think you can measure aspects of culture. So you might send surveys to your staff or to your team to measure sentiment regarding leadership or sentiment regarding change. If your organization's undergoing a lot of change, there are ways to measure aspects of it, but it's very difficult because, again, it's like culture is everything. It's all encompassing. It's very difficult
Sure.
to know.
So let me refine. So instead of it, because you're right, culture by base definition is just this is how we do things. So you can have a pretty regiment, top down dictatorship culture. And that's not really what we're trying to develop. So how do you do the assessment of these are good things, people are happy here? Going back to our retention conversation, this is a positive work environment culture where people are happy, they're thriving, they want to stay. There's good relationships between employees. Leadership is responsive and listening to different levels within the organization, like that type of culture. Like, how do you create an assessment that is also, it doesn't necessarily, so here's my tricky thing. It doesn't necessarily, because there's surveys that you're like, the way that is worded kind of gets you away with saying, oh, everything's great here. And you're like, that doesn't really capture maybe all that the employees are feeling.
Yeah.
And so how can you get like an authentic way to capture that true? Because if you do have a high, or if you have like high attrition, people are leaving, or maybe they're not responsive, there's a disconnect maybe between the levels or something like that. And then you get the survey result. I don't know. Look at these numbers. Look fantastic.
Yeah.
I wonder if there are any metric or like any instruments that have been like, oh no, we went through the bullshit. The way that we actually worded this question makes it so that way you can't devise actually a survey that allows people to just have this confirmation bias, right?
Yeah, I think you have to be mindful that any single measure needs to be considered in light of the whole, right? So if you have survey results that indicate that culture is quote unquote good, and yet you have like really high turnover and you have dissatisfaction with the products or services your culture is producing, then you know that there's a disconnect and you have to reconsider. But one other, like a specific practice, Nicole, do you want to tell them more about the stay interviews? You reviewed all of those data, but that would be an interesting practice to maybe share with them.
Yeah, so the state interviews, I think right now the plan is quarterly, right, Rob?
Yeah, every
It's
3 to 6
quarterly.
months, perhaps, we'll do a round of stay interviews.
Yeah, and this was something that a colleague of mine, we worked across a couple different organizations. And actually, when you were talking about Carrie, like specific like questions and how they're worded, I'm like, oh, that's my phone a friend. If I had the colleague right now to call, because it's really her wheelhouse and she's done some great work in that area, because we have done the same thing of trying to, when we've created our own surveys, tried to have questions that are as objective as possible. So not talking about like, how supported do I feel by my supervisor? It's questions like, when I ask my supervisor a question, they say X, Y, and Z. Or when my supervisor comes in to supervise me, they do X, Y, and Z practices, yes or no. So it's trying to get at that sense of what would be the objective behavior that I would like to see, and are they doing it or are they not doing it, with making the inference of, if I'm reliably doing this repertoire of supervisory practices, that's going to make my supervisee feel X, Y, and Z ways, which is going to be indicative that I'm going to have a positive culture. I don't have my phone a friend, so I can't ask her, but that's the gist of what that would look like. But to Rob's point about the stay interviews, it was a practice that I've seen done at some other organizations, more fairly new, and then something that Maraca was already doing when I joined. So I was like, this is fantastic. So on that kind of set cadence, having those individual conversations with employees, aspects of culture, like professional development? How supported are you by your colleagues? Are you excited to come into work every day? How often are you receiving feedback? And then two, what are the areas that the organization can do better on? I think is that really important piece of feedback. And then highlighting that, okay, the data are speaking for themselves, and the top three things that you all indicated, are they aligned with our strategic plans? Or are they not? If they're not aligned with our strategic plans, then we probably got to shift our plans a little bit, because our team is saying that these are the things that are the highest priority, and we should be using that feedback and that data to guide our decision making. And I think tying that back into kind of our original question about just patient outcomes and how it's influenced by decision making within the organization. I think in a leadership role, all decisions the question should be like, how is this going to affect patient outcomes? If I'm trying to just cut a corner in the hiring process, or I'm trying to cut a corner here and it's going to negatively impact patient outcomes, then I probably shouldn't be doing it. And I think having a leadership team that has a very diverse perspective on decision making and are not afraid to challenge one another on certain aspects of decision making. But I think at the end of the day, as long as everyone is aligned on, is this going to be a positive change for our learners, affect patient outcomes, then that's the direction you should be leaning in. But I think that also, yeah.
I just wanted to make sure I picked up on what you said, and I love this, is that even at the leadership level, allow for challenges. You know, how that's something that I try to create within my team all the time, is that even though I may be your supervisor, like you report to me, I approve your PTO, but like I also make sure that I supervise brilliant, amazing people, because I know that, like, I think, Nicole, I think you said this, you're not always the smartest person in the room, and how you work with people who complement your skills, not who are always the yes men. And so with that, what are some ways in which you all create a culture in which it allows competing ideas, while then you can walk away from that meeting being like, hey, you want to go grab lunch? What are things like?
And when we were interviewing Nicole, because Nicole just joined our team recently, so she's, how long has it been, Nicole? Just a couple months, really, if that?
I saw that on
so
LinkedIn.
She's fresh, but she's integrated. She's,
Yeah, it's about the end of January,
yeah,
mid
it's
to
been
end of January.
wonderful. But when we were meeting with one another, one of the conversations I remember having was like setting context that Maraca is not a place for egos. And I was like, because I'm getting to know her, right? And I just wanted to make it very clear that there's just like no room for egos in this place, because we're really trying to get our entire team focused on what matters most, without having distractions, without us having to manage status or worry about toxic culture, all these other things. And I could just see the sense of relief that came over her. That was like, I'm so glad that's not something I have to like be concerned with. And so that's one way that I think we've built a team and a culture where it's not personal. Like when Nicole disagrees with me or I disagree with Nicole, and we model this, like Katie and I, before Nicole came, Katie and I were working together, and Nissa has worked with us for years and years and knows that like Katie and I disagree on things all the time, but we find ways to make all things work in a way that's beautiful, knowing that whatever decisions we make are going to be good for our learners and are going to be good for our staff. And there's always balance. Usually it's not like Katie's way or Nicole's way or Robbie's way. It's like some hybrid of all of those perspectives together, right? Taking into account what we know is going to be best for our team. So I think that's how we've done it. And I'd say for the most part, it's been relatively I think that's a success. Like I think we've got a good team for the most part. Unless Nicole might have some off the record things to say. She might say, hey, can we stop recording here?
Just for context for our listeners, Katie is your wife. And what position does she hold within the organization?
Yeah, so Katie's essentially like her role is really she's on the board. Right now she's jumped in and she's doing a lot of day-to-day work with us, but our long-term vision for her role is to be on the board in the company, including myself, kind of accountable to the
Gotcha.
board. So yeah, that's her role right now. In the past, we've had lots of different kind of ways in which we've worked together, but
I love it. My
she's a pretty integral part of the culture, at least at this point.
My first business was Ethan and I, my husband, we opened up a learning center, and it was just he and I. And then we started taking on some instructors, and we would disagree on, I don't know, some, 'cause we're creating it. So we had policies, or this is like our protocol for this whatever program, and we would disagree on it. And we like, and that's, we would have this conversation in the middle of staff meeting, and some of our instructors would just like watch us like debate over it, and they were like back and forth. And then at the end we'd be like, okay, well, are you gonna go get me lunch? And they would just like laugh, and I was like, and so it was funny that then from, I recognize the dynamic. And so during interviews I would say, we are married and we will disagree like at during staff meetings. It doesn't mean that we're getting a divorce, it doesn't mean that the jeopardy, but we have different opinions, and that discord is actually good, because we want you to see where we're coming from, why we have these positions, the science behind it, and I think it encourages, then we wanted them to then participate in the debate and the exchange. And it is about the concept, like you mentioned, Rob. It's not about the person, it's not making it personal. It's about, here's the evidence or my experience with these different clients, the data that informs this decision. And do you have evidence that has come to the contrary? Let's refine this. Maybe we'll find something that's even better than both of our decisions, because it'll be this like merging new concept. But we won't get there if we just say, oh, it's always Carrie's way because she's the president, or because she has higher credentials than Ethan does, or anything like that, right? Like, we have to come through this refinement process through sometimes debate, because you're like, this is, for us it was just fun, but it's through these like fun conversations, and then it's just okay from there. Okay, cool, we're good, because it was about the thing and not about us as humans.
So I want to say that
Yeah.
this conversation, I feel like we're skating, because there's so much. And as you started this off with, Robbie, we could spend so much time in every single one of these pockets, but we are running out of time. And I don't want to neglect something that I think is really important, considering our viewership is made up largely of people who are employees and not leaders of the organization. So do you have, and it can be for supervisors as well, but what do you say to people when there's an injury, right? Either I need to manage up, or I, as an employee, am feeling hurt. Maybe it's a temporary thing, as you were talking about. Maybe we have a good relationship going forward. And sometimes when it goes awry and you had all of this good relationship, the hurt is even deeper. So, how do we heal when something goes off the rails?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. A lot of doing this type of work, it's very it's very relationally driven. So I think you're highlighting this aspect, Shannon, of doing the work like we're all humans and we work in really close quarters, like with one another, like we're just always together. I would say the most important thing you can do is just be honest and be vulnerable. It's okay to go to people and express your hurt. I think that's better than not saying anything at all. In that like radical candor framework, this book came out years ago, but in that quadrant of being radically candid, it's you challenge directly because you care personally. So when you care personally about somebody, you're willing to challenge them directly. So if I hurt Nicole or Nissa, they're going to come to me and challenge me directly because they care about me. I know that right? That's not to say that Carrie and Shannon, you probably would do the same thing, hopefully. But that's just a really important aspect of doing this work, because look, you could hide it, right? But that's not good for anyone. Like sometimes the right thing to do, I think always the right thing to do, is to challenge people directly because you care about them.
I would just push back gently, saying that, though, I think the culture has to be safe for you to do that. I think that there are situations in which organizations, it is an unsafe culture for people to do that. And if they were to challenge, they could either get fired, or possibly worse, it would just be like, then there would be retribution, right? Like their work would be made more miserable because then they were challenged. And we see this more with minorities.
I'm with you. Look, you're right. So this speaks to the idea that you have to have, one of the ways in which culture is built is by having psychologically safe teams. So if that's not there, then I would venture to say that you're probably not on the team that you want to be on. I'm sorry to say it, but I'm not telling everyone to go quit their jobs or whatever, but if you're not able to come to the people that you need to be able to go to for support and guidance, then that's probably not the best fit. That speaks to a toxic work environment, and the leader's job in that organization is to design a culture that minimizes toxic influences, that produces pro-social outcomes for everyone.
And I think I'll bring my point in just to wrap us up. But two thoughts I had throughout this whole kind of conversation, having worked with Rob really closely, is that bidirectional feedback is something that has to be discussed open and early, right? And I know that in the way that my supervision style is, I definitely check in with my RBTs right away. Hey, I'm your BCBA. I love to give feedback, but I also like to receive feedback, and I like it via email, phone call, in person, whichever way that is more comfortable for you. I've had RBTs that would prefer to email because it's not as direct, and some that will just pull me aside right after session and tell me right before we get to our cars. And I think in the examples that you gave, Rob and Carrie, with how you deal with those interactions, modeling it and having those types of conversations from a leadership level really demonstrate that it's okay for me to bring forth my concerns. Or there are times, and I think we have all felt this in our career, something was happening within an organization that just felt, a very unscientific term, but very yucky in your gut. Like you just knew that just did not feel right with who you are and what you believe in, and you have to say something. And I think working in an organization where you could find a way, whether that be a text, an email, or an in-person conversation, to just say, something happened today I'm not comfortable with, I'd like to figure out how to talk about this with you, is the safest way to allow RBTs, BTs, BCBAs to come forth and say, something is feeling off here and I really want to help fix it so I can stay, because maybe there are these other variables that I love about being here.
I think my feedback has always been to my team is that if I don't know it's happening, I can't fix it. So I want to know issues that are coming up so that way we can come together and troubleshoot and come up with a solution. And I think too, working with behavior technicians and letting them know everyone's going to have different supervision styles, and particularly with some of our BCBAs, like maybe you don't feel comfortable going to your BCBA at this moment. And that's okay, because you'll get there. We'll establish that relationship. So have at least that one person at the organization, whether that's the clinical director or that's maybe, I know a lot of organizations right now are really carving out spaces for even BCBAs and more like OBM and like retention focused roles. And that's the person that does the stay interviews in some organizations, and finding that person that is your person that you feel comfortable with. And then they can then trickle down to the clinical director to help support that BCBA through coaching and mentoring to then be able to be eventually your safe person. And so I think using everything as a learning opportunity to just grow, be better. And I think as long as we're all continuing to move forward as an organization, as a team, like that's how we're going to get better and provide the best outcomes for learners.
That was beautifully said, and I think it's a good place to let it rest, other than to say the last secret word is job, J-O-B, job. All right, so let's throw out the contact information for finding you guys in Maraca and all the wonderful resources that you have on your website.
Yeah, I would definitely encourage everyone to go to the Maraca website. The blog is going to get even more resourceful. We've got a number of blogs already there on culture, on organizational culture. We have articles on behavioral systems analysis and how to use systems analysis to improve culture. That's, as a starting point, I would go there. It's written at a level that, like, whether you're expert or somewhere between that and novice, like, it's helpful. So that's a great place. And then we're also relatively soon here, we're going to have our own podcast that we're excited to kick off and launch. We've had some like technical issues and just getting everything kind of lined up and ready to go. But we're hoping that by the end of the spring, we've got that on the website as well. So we're super excited to be doing that.
And be sure and follow us on our social media sites. I think sometimes we record out of order for release, so perhaps the last time from the last episode I'd already said it, but it's also likely that I didn't. We do have new socials on LinkedIn and on Facebook. see our institute at both. And you can always reach out to us with suggestions for other guests that you want by emailing the behavioral view at centralreach.com. And with that, I will say thanks to everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching this episode of the Behavioral View. To get your CEU, follow the link in the instructions below. You can then go to the attendance verification quiz, where you'll enter in the secret words and pay the CEU fee to generate your certificate. If you've already done the work, you may as well get the credit.